Today we're going to be going over a new rumor that has popped up regarding the PlayStation 5 that I find very interesting. I think many of you will find it interesting as well. It's certainly worth taking a little bit of time here on the channel to go over, and I wanted to give my opinion on this because people seem to be very opinionated on this rumor. Even if it is just a rumor, it does sound like it's something that could be plausible, and because of that, I think that's why people are very much interested in this and paying close attention to it. It has gained a lot of traction and a lot of momentum over the past 24 hours, so let's get into it. It says that a fast-spreading rumor asserts that the PS5 Pro will launch at the same time as the base model PS5, and though it should be taken with a grain of salt, it may not be all that far-fetched. The rumor apparently started at this year's Computer Entertainment Developers Conference in Japan, which was attended by journalist, I'm going to do my best to pronounce their name here, Zenji Nishikawa. He happened to explain all this while live streaming Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Nishikawa says it was a rumor he wasn't able to discuss on Backspace.fm, the tech podcast he co-hosts, but he still goes on to share a few details. He notes that when the PS4 came out, the only difference between the models was in their storage capacity. Then the PS4 Pro launched 3 years later and broadened the PS4 family tree into two main branches, and the market responded well. Other products like iPhone have proven that consumers can embrace multiple versions of the same basic product at launch. This time from the beginning, the aim is for the PS5 and the PS5 Pro to be released simultaneously, Nishikawa says, again citing rumors that were circulating at the conference. The big question, aside from whether those rumors were accurate, is how a PS5 Pro's specs would differ to a standard PS5 at launch. Unfortunately, Nishikawa didn't expand much on the subject. What we know about PS5 so far is that it will have a solid-state drive to cut loading times, and that it will likely support up to 8K graphics with ray tracing supported from the beginning. That sounds really good already, so what would a PS5 Pro do on top of all that to establish it itself as the top-of-the-line PlayStation experience? So the article writer says here at the end that they are still unconvinced that this rumor is accurate, but after listening to Nishikawa's explanation, they're more open to the idea of the PS4 Pro coming during the launch of the base model PlayStation 5, and this is all under the assumption that Sony is planning on launching the PlayStation 5 in holiday of 2020, which realistically, yes, that is most likely when we can expect it, specifically November of 2020, because that is also most likely when Microsoft is going to release Project Scarlet, and we know how competitive Sony is in this regard, so that's when you can most likely expect these consoles to launch. Now, my first thought on this is it makes sense if it's true. I could totally see Sony doing something like this, but the big question that does pop into my mind is exactly what the writer of this article asked at the end there, where if this were to be the case, if Sony were to decide that they want to have a PS5 Pro and a PS5 base model at the launch, two different versions of the same console that offer different capabilities, what exactly would differentiate them? And I've been thinking about this, and the only thing I could come up with is the biggest difference here between the two, obviously, is going to have to be the price. If this is something that Sony is thinking about doing, it's because they want to try to have the PlayStation 5 appeal to as many people as possible, and they want to give people options. For me personally, the only thing that I could think of that could really truly differentiate them is one would, I think, have to really cut down on the GPU potentially, because we know, at least I would assume, I mean, we don't really know anything, but I would assume that if this is something that Sony is pursuing, they would certainly want to make sure that the base model PlayStation 5 retains the SSD, because one thing that we know about the next generation of consoles for both the PlayStation 5 and Project Scarlet is that both Sony and Microsoft are putting a lot of stock into the SSD, and they're going to be really leveraging that as a way to communicate to consumers and to gamers that this is one of the big differentiating factors between the last generation and the new generation of consoles. The SSD is going to be a big game changer. We've even heard a lot of developers explaining that this is going to be a game changer. It's going to have a big impact on the way games basically run on the next generation of consoles. It's going to pretty much cut down load times or remove them entirely, which that is a big deal for some games for sure. And developers are going to be able to just do a lot more. So I would have to imagine that if this is true, the base model will have to retain that. The other thing, in my opinion, it's going to have to retain in order to be appealing as a base model, in order to separate itself from the PlayStation 4 Pro, because if you think about it, that's the number one thing that Sony would have to do a good job with if they are planning on utilizing this model. They would need to ensure that they convince people that, hey, this is different from the PlayStation 4 Pro, and here's why. Here's why you're not going to want to buy a PlayStation 4 Pro. Instead, you're going to want to go buy a base model PlayStation 5. It's going to have to retain a beefier CPU. I think the CPU across the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5 base model across the PlayStation 5 Pro model, again, if this is true, is going to have to be the same, because we're going to have to see that difference in frame rates. We can't have a situation where the CPU within the base model PS5 is vastly different from the CPU in the PlayStation 5 Pro, because if we did get a situation like that, it would create a lot of problems for development. And at that point, the biggest concern that people would have, and this is the number one thing I've seen brought up from gamers so far when we're talking about this rumor, the biggest problem they have and the biggest concern and the biggest reason why they are against this is because if Sony does do this, it means that developers are going to be targeting the base model, and because of that, we're not going to see the full potential of the Pro model really achieved. And I think that will be true. There's no denying that if this is something Sony is currently pursuing, then developers are going to target the lowest spec. But then the question then becomes, what does that mean? Well, in terms of CPU, it shouldn't mean too much. If they share the same CPU, then it's not going to be a big deal. We know that the Pro model will be able to, or the base model, I should say, will be able to do exactly what the Pro model can, and the biggest difference may end up being the GPU. And we know that when it comes to graphics processing, the GPU pretty much takes the load there. That has to do with pushing pixel counts and whatnot. So what I could see happening here is a base model PS5 where there's going to be some major incentive to want to upgrade to it. And the major incentive isn't going to come in the form of graphics, though. I mean, of course, the graphics will look better than the PS4 Pro, and especially the base model PS4, of course. But the real drive is going to be, you're going to get better frame rates and you're going to get much better performance within games due to that SSD, as well as maybe some other big features that Sony is planning for the PlayStation 5 that we don't know about yet. And when it comes to the PlayStation 5 Pro, again, if this rumor is true, I have to keep reiterating that because we don't know. I'm just trying to make sense of it here. It's what exactly is the Pro going to offer to differentiate itself from the base model? Well, it could be a feature set. There could be some things that the Pro offers that simply they just can't do with the base model. But I would have to imagine that on the GPU side of things, it's going to have a beefier GPU, and it's naturally going to be much more expensive. Maybe there's a lot more they could do with the Pro model that we just don't know about, that I'm not, tech savvy enough to be able to speculate upon right now. Maybe there's a lot more they could do with it. Maybe it could have a better SSD. I don't know. Again, I'm not the most technical person. Just based off of what I know, I'm trying to really figure out what exactly would separate these two, and what would the price difference be there, because there's no doubt that if they do a base model PS5, even if they do retain the SSD and a next generation or CPU, it's still going to be pretty expensive. That's still not going to be cheap. So we also have to ask ourselves, if they were to do this, what would the price difference be? Would it be significant enough? Well, even if the price difference ended up just being $100, $400 versus $500, or even $500 versus $600, that's going to be a huge difference for a lot of people, because $100 is $100. And it's really just going to be, one model is going to appeal to the people who just want the basic thing and they're willing to upgrade to the basic thing, and they're going to end up feeling like they're saving money by upgrading to the basic console that's on offer. And the other one is going to really appeal to the hardcore gamer. It's just going to be up to Sony, if they do decide to do this, to do a really good job in differentiating the two and really making it seem like there's an actual reason for doing this, and something that is going to motivate people to want to go out there and really make a decision, like, do I want to go with the base model or the Pro model, the last thing that Sony will want is to have a situation where they have two consoles on the market and people are confused as to what the difference between them is other than the price, and if there is a price difference, what exactly is the benefit going to be if you're willing to pay more money. So these are the important things that Sony would have to look out for. Now, my opinion on this, well, I don't know if I really believe this, because one of the things we have to pay attention to here is that Sony did go on record saying that they're not going to launch a second version of PlayStation VR at the launch of the PlayStation 5 because they're afraid of confusing the market and having too many items out there and too many items on the market, too many new pieces of hardware. Maybe they don't feel that way towards the console itself. There is a difference between offering two different versions of a console and having a power difference versus offering a new VR headset as well as a new console. So I could see the difference there, but we do need to pay attention to that. That is Sony's way of kind of indicating that they don't want to get in their own way. And the idea of having two different models could potentially, if they mess it up, it could get in their own way, right? It could get in the way of the PlayStation 5 and its overall success if they mess up the messaging on that. Now, as to whether or not I would be happy about this, personally, I wouldn't really care too much. If this is something that Sony wants to pursue, that's fine. I'm not necessarily for it or against it. The part of me that feels like I would be for it is if they're going to do this, they need to ensure that developers are willing to be able to develop across the board. Now, if we see what they've done with the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 4 Pro, they've done a good job, right? They made it so that the consoles are similar enough that developers don't really have to go that far out of their way to utilize the PlayStation 4 Pro model and really add some benefit there. And as somebody who does play on the PlayStation 4 Pro, I do see the benefit and I'm appreciative of it. It's just, again, we have to really ask what the big difference is going to be. For all we know, it could be, if they do end up doing this, a very similar situation that we see with the PS4 and the PS4 Pro, where the difference is literally just going to be in pixel counts, and occasionally you're going to get maybe slightly higher frame rates. That's what we see right now with the PS4 Pro. I mean, there are some other modes they have, like boost mode and super sampling, and so those are things that we can expect as well. But again, it's something that I'm okay with. I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't freak out. I wouldn't be like, this is a major problem. I would just say, well, hey, it's more options, and options are usually a good thing. Again, it's all just going to come down to what is the real difference going to be here. And for those who do upgrade to the more expensive model, will we actually see those benefits? I think if Sony is going to do this, they're certainly going to be thinking about these things and planning for them. And so if they were to do it, I would have confidence in it. You know, a lot of the things that PlayStation has done so far, they've done really well. They put a lot of thought into. Even though there's a lot of people that believe the PS4 Pro is some kind of terrible console because the Xbox One X is more powerful than it, we need to understand that the Xbox One X came out a year after the Pro did. And the Pro was Sony was the first one to do something like this, pretty much, within a modern day console generation. So I don't know. The only time I'd really be against it is if I truly felt that it's just kind of like a gimmicky thing and there's really not that much of a difference between the base model PS5 and the PS5 Pro. At that point, I would be a little bit annoyed and think, like, is this Sony's way of just trying to get more money out of people? Is this their way of trying to take advantage of the hardcore gaming market? Hopefully they won't do that, because I think they're smart enough to know that the hardcore gaming market, there's a reason why they're called the hardcore gaming market, because they care, they pay close attention to these things, and they will be able to see right through Sony if they were to do this in an attempt to just be like, oh look, we have this hardcore model that really is only like, there's a 5% difference between this model and the base model, but pay $100 or $200 extra for it. I just don't see them doing that. So I don't know, guys. At the end of the day, it is just a rumor, and most of this was just pure speculation. But again, I find it very, very interesting. And so at this point, I want you guys to think about what we went over here and leave your thoughts down in the comments below. I want you to let me know if this is something that you would be interested in. Would you get the Pro model if this is something that Sony is planning on doing at launch? Do you think that this would be a mistake? And if you think it would be a mistake, let me know why. If you think it would be a great thing, tell me why down below. But that does it for the video, guys. Leave it a like if you did enjoy it, or if you found it informative. It really helps it out. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss a video, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.